All right, let's talk about AAC and the implementation of AAC for people that have traumatic brain injuries. So, first and foremost, a TBI is an injury to the brain and it's caused by a sudden trauma. So, think about those individuals who have maybe been in a car accident and have hit their head on their steering wheel. These injuries can range anywhere from being mild, like a concussion, to severe, which would be some lasting brain damage. Typically, these individuals are going to have communication deficits, meaning they might have an aphasia where they have trouble understanding and producing spoken language or reading or writing. They might have dysarthria where they have weak muscles, meaning they have a difficult time with the clarity and the strength of their speech. Or maybe they have an apraxia, which is the motor planning disorder that makes it difficult to coordinate motor movements that are needed for speech. Oftentimes, these individuals will also have executive functioning deficits. So they have difficulties with memory and sustaining their attention, planning and organizing information. They have difficulties with problem solving and with their self control, maybe with their emotional regularity. So, this is really difficult because these individuals, their lives and their daily functions look much different now than they did prior to their injury. So, looking at TBI and AAC together, it's important to know that a lot of these individuals are going to use AAC devices for different durations of time. Some may just use their AAC temporarily during their very acute stages of their injury, but others might need a long-term AAC device because they're facing long-term cognitive deficits or language deficits and a long-term disability. So, regardless of how long they're using it, we want to make sure we're curating it to the individual so that we can enhance and aid their communication given these newfound deficits that they're facing. So, there's three kind of technologies that we want to keep in mind when thinking about those with TBIs. The first and foremost, we have AAC, and those are those tools or strategies that are used to support or replace natural speech for the people that have communication challenges. Then we have assistive technology. So think of equipment or items that are used for improving functional capabilities for somebody that has disabilities. So maybe think about the switches that would be used on an AAC to make it more accessible, or maybe about hearing aids or cognitive aids. An example here could be even a smartphone. And a smartphone could be an assistive technology device if we're programming it to maybe have alarms that go off so that an individual with memory impairment can be reminded to take their medication at certain times. And then we have information and communication technologies. And these refer to any sort of device or application used for communication. So think of smartphones for texting, internet, even email or social media. So texting is a good example because it's a phone is portable, texting is socially acceptable, and it's easily accessible. So maybe an individual would use texting to text themselves key points to remember for conversations later. So this can help people with TBIs have more meaningful interactions later on. So as for types of AAC, it's important to keep in mind that people that have TBIs, their deficits are going to evolve over time. The acuity of their deficits is going to evolve and change over time. So we want to adapt AAC solutions as the individual's needs are shifting. So as their needs shift, their AAC supplementation and support should also shift. So we want to make sure we're doing routine evaluations to make sure that the AAC being provided is the best fit. So we have no-tech AAC, and those are gesture-based communications or facial expressions. We have low-tech, and that could be anything like a printed alphabet or maybe a printed communication board. There are mid-tech options, which are devices that offer digitized speech voice output that's done through like a voice recording of a single message, or sometimes it can be multiple messages, just depending on the device. And then we have high tech, which are those computers or tablets, and those offer a really wide range of different visual or auditory access features. And they have synthesized voice options and typically have some pretty extensive software features as well. So, thinking about access to AAC, I want to talk about a special consideration, which is acute care settings. So, what's interesting is there's actually inadequate implementation of AAC within an acute care setting. So, we might think that it would be the opposite of this because there's such availability of AAC devices, and when you have trained SLPs in the acute setting, but the actual use of the AAC in those settings remains limited. And that's due to a couple of barriers. And the first one is the cost and insurance issue. So think about the high cost associated with AAC devices and the way that that hinders access to obtaining a device. We also have to think about insurance reimbursement policies and how, not every insurance company is going to cover the expenses associated with an AAC. And then we have to consider the acuity of health needs in the hospital. So really there's a prioritization for immediate medical needs rather than communication rehabilitation, which of course makes sense. But there are, reduced opportunities for individuals to be able to use effective communication in this setting. And so, we have to think about the consequences this has for patient care because the lack of effective communication can really hinder decision-making processes, and it leaves both patients and providers without the necessary information they need to make informed medical decisions. And then it's also really depriving the individual of the opportunity to begin making rehabilitative gains like right out of the gate, right as soon as they acquire their injury. We're kind of putting a hold, adding some wait time before they're able to start that rehabilitative process. So as for the actual assessment of devices for individuals, we want to think about people with TBIs in 3 communicator types. So the first is going to be emergent communicators. And these are people who are unable to speak due to their cognitive situation. So for this group, AAC is mostly going to be used for ongoing cognitive and language assessments, so that we can see, how this person is progressing. And it's really just going to be used for communicating basic wants and needs. Then we have transitional communicators, and these are people that are recovering some natural speech, but they're still presenting with severe dysarthrias. And so they're going to need AAC to participate in their rehabilitative process and to communicate their wants and needs effectively. And then we have long-term augmentative communicators. And these people are typically unable to use their natural speech for communication because they have severe dysarthria. So these are individuals that are going to be further along in their recovery process and just not making as many gains anymore. To make devices specific for individuals, we of course want to use feature matching. So for people with TBI, we really want to look at their display of their board. So when designing the AAC display, clinicians need to attend to the cognitive effort that's required to understand the displayed context. So we need to consider grid display because it gives a lot of line-drawn images or pictures that are just with a static background. And these are harder for individuals that have TBIs to be able to understand what the intended message is of that static image. Therefore, maybe we would consider something like a visual scene because visual scenes display objects and people and their natural environment, and so they're intended to mimic specific situations. We want to think about access methods. Does this individual need a switch? Do they need sensitive touch accommodations? Do they need an eye gaze device? People that have TBIs are going to have a lot of motor movement and fine motor control difficulties. We want to think about linguistic features. What is this person's language proficiency at this point in time? And what are their communication goals? How can we best get their vocabulary on their board to be most effective for them? How can we add additional vocabulary so that they're able to reach their goals or they're able to participate in all of the environments they're hoping to participate in? And we want to think about portability and positioning. Do these individuals have like field cuts? Do they have gaze preferences? A lot of people, TBIs will. So where do we need to position this AAC so it's most adaptive to them? What kind of battery life are we talking about? And what do we have a backup plan if the battery were to die? And then we want to think about operational features. So we want to really think about tangible space for people with TBIs, because tangible space on the communication device will often force the user to have to navigate between pages. And this may contribute to additional difficulty if the user's working memory, attention, and cognitive flexibility isn't quite intact. And that's the case for many people with TBIs. All right, so let's take a second here and let's dive a little bit deeper into the framework for TBIs and the AAC intervention. So I want to have us take a look at each of these three categories so that we can see, what are the tangible options for these individuals. So let's cover the emergent communicator first. So like I had said, these are people who are unable to speak due to severe cognitive impairments. And this group, AAC, is really going to be essential for ongoing cognitive and language assessments while they're in the hospital. They're going to need to use their communication, their AAC, to get across yes and no answers and just communicate basic wants and needs. So these are normally individuals who are still in the acute rehab settings, and their AAC methods are often temporary, and then they continue to adapt as the individual's cognitive and language and motor skills continue to improve. So they're probably going to be relying on unaided or low-tech AAC approaches. So some ideas for you all here are yes and no response systems. So think about things like head nods, thumbs up, thumbs down, eye movements or eye blinks to indicate yes and no. We have object choices, so holding up maybe two shirts. Do you want to wear the blue shirt today or the red shirt today? And using pointing for that. We have simple communication boards with maybe 2 or 3 pictures. This could be family members, a couple of simple activity choices. And then there's single message voice output devices that can communicate a simple yes or no to be able to request an item or an activity. And those would be used within structured contexts, not really spontaneously. Then we have the transitional communicator, and those were the individuals who were in the process of recovering their natural speech, but their severe dysarthria or voice disorder was too much to be able to completely rely on their speech alone. So we're going to typically see these people in their early to middle stages of recovery, and they're probably going to be in like an inpatient or an outpatient rehab setting. And they're going to rely on AAC to effectively communicate their wants and needs. So some ideas for these individuals are writing or using alphabet boards. So writing is always actually considered first because it's familiar and more automatic than pointing to letters. But if that's not an option because of motor impairment, then we could always use an alphabet board. We can use low-tech alphabet or communication boards that are accessed by looking or gazing at images with the eyes or eye-safe laser pointers. We can use low-tech communication boards and books. We can also use digitized static SGDs, which are those speech generating devices for the individuals that have significant cognitive language deficits and they don't have that spelling skill like that has yet to reemerge at a functional level. There's also text to speech, and that's for individuals with functional spelling. So letters or words are actually spoken as the individual types them. And then there's dynamic display SGDs. And so that would be for people that have more attention and organization and memory skills. And so they can actually navigate between displays or screens. And then we'll talk about long-term augmentative communicators here. And those are individuals who, again, cannot use natural speech due to their severe dysarthria. And they may also have different levels of cognitive and language impairments. So these are going to be people that are in the middle to late stages of recovery. And they often are, trying to participate in outpatient or community rehab. And they might be trying to return to home or school or work settings. So they might be making progress. It's just very slow progress. And so their assistive technology is going to look very similar to transitional communicators. But the difference here is that they're going to be using this in a variety of contexts rather than set up specific structured contexts. They're going to be using this spontaneously. So let's take a quick look here at a case study to put this all together. So first and foremost, the situation is that we have TH, and she is a 25-year-old graduate student who sustained a moderate traumatic brain injury and is currently in rehabilitation. She primarily communicates with her parents and her outpatient rehab team, which she visits 3 times a week for ongoing speech, physical, and occupational therapies. After the injury, she has felt lonely due to limited communication with her friends, and she lives with her parents as her prolonged impulsivity, lack of insight into her deficits, and poor judgment have made independent living challenging. Her communication difficulties include visual inattention, low frustration tolerance, and impulsivity, contributing to her feelings of isolation. Her goal, despite these challenges, is that she is ready to return to graduate school to complete her degree. Some background about her AAC experience is that while she was in the ICU, she used a low-tech laminated visual display that allowed her to communicate her basic needs and answers using yes and no questions. The inpatient SLP trained nurses, staff, and family to use the board. Unfortunately, at first, TH's visual inattention and fatigue made this challenging, but with staff positioned at her right and cues to focus on her left, she was able to overcome this and achieved 80% accuracy in using the board. As TH's alertness improved, she still struggled with thought formulation and maintaining conversations. So while she was on the medicine floor, she began to use pen and paper and was encouraged to use mind mapping for discussions with medical providers. TH also recorded conversations with her smartphone, which helped reduce cognitive load and served as reminders for important topics. And then while she was in rehab with increased awareness and motivation, the SLP introduced tablet-based software applications, which replaced the earlier paper methods to streamline her communication. She focused on improving her speech rate and breath support using a metronome app, and her progress was tracked through the app. Now, TH's communication needs have evolved throughout her recovery, so she's transitioned from no tech to low tech to now a high tech system. So she is currently still using a tablet, and it has various applications, including a metronome app for speech rate and a deep breathing app to manage frustration. She uses social media for conversational and topic maintenance skills, and deep breathing apps were used for the mindfulness and for rest. This transition is deemed appropriate due to her improved cognitive awareness at this point in time and her preference to use technology. TH has been assessed for accommodations that have been developed based on her neuropsychological test results. The SLP has specifically trained TH to now use a smart pen for note-taking, which will be integral for her ability to capture information during lectures. Additionally, TH employs organizational strategies using folders on her tablet to manage her coursework. She uses memos to remind herself of key questions to ask professors, and to help her mitigate her fatigue and enhance her focus during study sessions, TH has been trained to set a timer that allows for regular breaks. So this is a comprehensive approach that aims to support her cognitive communication needs and facilitate a successful transition back to grad school. So it is recommended that TH enrolls part-time in her grad program. Her next steps include sustaining the use of her tablet as an AAC device to improve functional communication, and therapy should focus on involving refining her strategies to support her transition back to graduate school, which is using that smart pen for note-taking, setting up reminders on her cell phone for studying, as well as using her tablet for effective communication across all environments. So A little reflection question here is, how did TH's level of communication evolve over time? Which communication levels did she go through? We're thinking about emergent, transitional, and then those long-term augmentative communicators. Take a second and think about that. And the answer is all three. So at first, she was an emergent communicator when she relied in the ICU on using that laminated board to communicate wants and needs with yes and no questions. And then she was a transitional communicator when she used her pen and paper as well as her recording on her smartphone. And then she was a long-term augmentative communicator as she continues to use her tablet to enhance her functional communication skills across environments. Here are my references. And thank you so much for listening to this. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. I'd love to help.